Well, it's been a little while since my last Kirby review on this channel, and my last review in general for that matter, but I'm back with Kirby's Dream Land 2. Previously, I had reviewed Kirby's Dream Land and Kirby's Adventure, and if you haven't seen those episodes, then I would recommend giving them a look if you want context. My main takeaway was that while Kirby's Dream Land was a fine little handheld title, the transition to the NES with Adventure resulted in a much larger and deeper experience than their predecessor. With Dream Land 2, the first thing to know is that it returns to the original Game Boy, well, kind of. The footage used in this video actually has Super Game Boy enhancements, meaning that there are extra colors in the HUD and a different color palette for each level. But the fact that it was originally released for the Game Boy will probably mean a smaller scale game than Adventure, but hopefully at least an improvement over the original Dream Land. Anyways, let's push start as directed and get this rolling. Structurally, Kirby's Dream Land 2 is split up into 7 worlds, with the first 3 worlds only having 3 stages each plus a boss fight, but after that, steadily increasing the number of stages per world to the point where the last world, Dark Castle, has 7 stages. There's also a hub area for each world, although these aren't quite as large or as good at giving context to the levels as the ones in Kirby's Adventure. Even still, this is already an impressive amount of content for an original Game Boy platformer, and on top of that, there's a bunch of bonus content that I'll get into later. For now, the main gameplay. What first stuck out to me was that Kirby is unable to run or slide like he was in Adventure. This honestly kind of puzzles me. They were pretty handy additions in Kirby's Adventure, and I'd imagine that there are several points where they'd be useful in this game too. I don't see how the Game Boy would limit their ability to be included, considering it has as many buttons as the NES controller. The ability to absorb the abilities of enemies, that's a lot to say out loud, you eat, does return from Adventure, so it's not like they weren't taking any pages from that game. That's ultimately just an elongated nitpick though, and aside from that, the base controls and mechanics are about as good and responsive as you could hope from the Kirby series at this point. As for the copy abilities themselves, they consist of only a select few from Kirby's Adventure, which is something I'm more willing to chalk up to handheld limitations. While a couple feel pretty clunky to use against enemies due to limited range, they nonetheless still provide the same benefits to the gameplay in terms of adding variety that they did in Kirby's Adventure. On top of the typical copy abilities, there's an additional mechanic new to this series, Kirby's Animal Friends. What do they do exactly? Well, they change up your mobility and completely overhaul the copy ability you're using. This means that there are essentially an additional 21 abilities on top of the standard ones, which is pretty cool and somewhat makes up for the fact that so many copy abilities are excluded here. Sure, a couple times the ability doesn't seem to change much, the stone ability with both Ku and Kind acting largely the same as the regular stone for example, but many times the new abilities are a lot of fun to use. I'll use Spark for some examples. Rick the Hamster lets you move faster on the ground and lets you walk on slippery surfaces without, well, slipping. Using the Spark ability with Rick will transform it into something akin to the Beam ability that is otherwise absent in this game. The notable downside to using Rick is that you're unable to float while doing so, which often makes the game much more challenging. Ku the Owl, by contrast, is all about the flying. I think he can fly faster than Kirby, enough to allow him to resist air currents at least. He can turn the Spark ability into a devastating thunderstorm. Kind the Ocean Sunfish is third, and he lets you swim faster, push against water currents, and inhale things while underwater. With him, the Spark ability turns into a light bulb projectile that's useful for lighting up dark rooms, which is handy for finding many rainbow drops. Once again, however, you're unable to use the signature float ability when you're not in the water, and even the overall ground movement is nerfed with Kind. These sort of caveats for using the animals come off as a bit strange to me, as well as inconsistent since I can't think of any major control downside to using Ku, but that's at least counterbalanced by the fact that they have a separate life bar from Kirby, meaning that running out of HP as them doesn't cost you a life. How do you acquire your buddies, you may ask? They'll be trapped in a bag waiting to be freed, often opened through defeating a mini-boss. Yeah, similar to Kirby's Adventure, Dream Land 2 has an assortment of mini-bosses that you'll encounter multiple times. These are okay, but if you don't have any copy ability equipped, then it can feel like there's a lot of waiting involved. On a similar note, a lot of the main bosses feel a bit been there, done that. About half of them are literally the same character seen in a previous game, and most of the others are set up in a similar fashion to some other previous boss in the series. Rough reminds me of Lolo and La in that the arena is set up in several tiers that the boss runs across. And Sweet Stuff is a slow auto-scrolling boss similar to Heavy Mole, just underwater this time. That's not to say the returning bosses aren't improved or iterated on in any way. Wispy Wood's actually prepared for the battle this time, remembering to wear a mask because he knows Kirby's gonna be spitting in his face. I'm sure that line's gonna age well. He's also got a new attack in store in the form of spiky roots that jut out of the ground, which actually makes this fight more challenging than the ones in the previous 2 games. Mr. Shine Shine and Mr. Bright and Krakow also sport a couple new patterns and attacks, while King Dedede has a new Rage mode, making his attacks more powerful. On the full scale though, these encounters don't really feel new at all, despite these efforts. Quite frankly, that's how I feel about a lot of aspects of this game. Some of the music, for example, is literally a reuse from past Kirby games. Ripple Field's music is a rehash of Float Island's theme from Dreamland 1, and Red Canyon is incredibly similar to the Yogurt Yard level theme from Kirby's Adventure. Yes, technically Adventure used a theme from the first Dreamland, but it actually made a point of it with a full throwback level. Now fortunately, Kirby's Dreamland 2 has plenty of original tracks, and they're still pretty good stuff. Maybe not quite as memorable or iconic as the music of the past two games, but with a similar sound that's pleasant on the ears. Special mention would have to go to the Cloudy Park level theme for including what almost sounds like a real horned instrument on Game Boy. What's worth noting is that besides the typical level, boss, and hub world themes, there are also themes that play when you have a certain animal buddy with you. Their loop lengths are generally shorter than that of the regular level themes, but make up for that by being pleasant enough to listen to repeatedly. Now, not everything about Kirby's Dream Land 2 feels like old hat, as the levels do add a few concepts that are new for the Kirby series. One of these is Point Stars, which are an additional collectible that grant you an extra life upon collecting 7 of them. This does make amassing extra lives pretty easy. I didn't get a game over in any of the regular stages, but the game does at least become more involved as it progresses. While the first 3 worlds of this game are really basic, World 4 offers some new platforming gimmicks that are further spread throughout the game. Icicles, or maybe stalactites depending on the setting, will sometimes drop from the ceiling, acting as an additional hazard to avoid. Much like the last game, slippery floors and wind hazards are also present, but this time you have an animal friend to deal with them. There are also blocks that will crumble and disappear shortly after standing on them. This stuff is pretty typical for the platformer genre and nothing groundbreaking, except in a literal sense I guess. And sometimes they're made ineffective by your floating ability, but they do at least provide some shakeups that the previous games were somewhat lacking in. Not all of these are great though. There's an abundance of auto-scrolling sections throughout the back half of the game for some reason. These kinds of levels generally aren't well liked since they force the player to go at a set pace dictated by the game and no slower or faster. While most of the ones in this game are pretty harmless, being short and decently paced, there's one towards the end of the game that comes straight out of the depths of hell, since multiple times you're given 3 options to choose from to progress, but 2 of them are dead ends that lead to instant death, and you won't know that the path you chose is a dead end until it's too late to turn around, leading to your untimely doom and but that's about the worst it gets. Aside from those things, most of what I said about the level design in my previous Kirby videos holds true here, although it feels like there are fewer mini-challenges for optional goodies in this game. Heck, I can't even remember a single time the invincibility power-up is found. Speaking of mini-challenges, aside from the regular level design, there's an additional side quest similar to the one in Kirby's Adventure. In each of the 7 worlds, there's a rainbow drop hidden somewhere in one of the stages. Doesn't sound like much, right? 7 rainbow drops in total? Well, guess what? It's not as easy as it may sound. Problem 1 is that while the game indicates which worlds you've gotten the rainbow drop in, it doesn't tell you which stage within the world holds the rainbow drop. Most of them are in the last stage of each world, so that is a pattern you might pick up on, but a couple of them aren't, which might be why I didn't pick up on that pattern until I was over halfway through scripting this video. Cloudy Park is probably the most egregious offender since it has 6 stages, but the rainbow drop is in stage 2. While the rainbow drop in Grassland is on the beaten path and you'll be able to remember which level it's in, the others require some exploring to find. When you don't know which level the thing's in though, it means you'll likely end up scouring many levels that you don't need to just to find the thing you've missed. At least with the big buttons in Kirby's Adventure, they gave a flashy indicator so you knew which individual levels you needed to revisit. Problem 2 is that each rainbow drop often requires you to get a specific copy ability in combination with a specific animal friend, and a lot of the time the things you need aren't readily available within the levels housing the magic doohickeys. This starts as early as the second world, Big Forest. While you're likely to have Coo the Owl at this point, the fire and cutter abilities won't cut it for breaking the blocks and getting the rainbow drop, try as you might. Instead, you'll need the needle ability, but of course the first enemy in the entire game that gives you needle is in the very next room. Well, just go back to the previous room and find the rainbow drop again, right? Nope, they don't even let you do that. You'll just have to re-enter the level, get to the door again, get the rainbow drop, and exit. While most of the later drops don't literally require backtracking to reach, they do still require you to have a certain animal full body copy ability combination to reach, and if you don't have one of those two things, chances are you'll need to go to a previous level to get them and carry them through the level with the drop. If your animal friend dies during this process, it most likely means you'll have to leave the level and go to a different one to get it back. Personally, I don't think it's bad to add the mini challenge of having to avoid losing your animal friend or copy ability before reaching the collectible. In fact, having to use all three to get the rainbow drop in a deathless run of a level in Cloudy Park is a pretty neat idea. Another creative idea is having to memorize a sequence of copy abilities and eating the right ones to progress. I'm willing to give credit where I think it's due, but you also might not know which stage is the most convenient for getting the specific animal friend you need, meaning even more back and forth through the stages. All things considered, I feel like acquiring the rainbow drops is more like a hassle than it should be, and regrettably, the reward for getting all the rainbow drops is pretty underwhelming in my opinion. Upon beating King Dedede with all the rainbow drops in hand, Kirby wields the rainbow sword and exorcises dark matter from the king. Personally, I didn't think the boss fight against the fiend was very fun. The first phase, Dark Matter Blade, gave me a lot of trouble since I initially assumed that you were supposed to inflict damage by slashing him with a sword, but the strategy is very inefficient. Every time you slash with the sword, you're locked in place, making it hard to dodge the attacks, and the damage output is simply pathetic. It still does some damage though, which might lead you to believe that's what you're supposed to do, but no. Instead, the most effective strategy is to wait until he uses his orb attack and slash the orbs so they're deflected back at him. Where have I seen this before? The second phase is quite similar as it fires off round appendages that you have to hit back. Other than that, the attacks are generally easy to avoid if you know what you're doing, but finding that out can be a bit of trial and error, further compounded by the fact that if you take too long, the game will repeatedly inflict unavoidable damage and eventually death. I wouldn't mind all of that too much if it wasn't for the fact that if you die to this phase, you have to fight Dark Matter Blade all over again. This is why you can't tank hits trying to attack the blade form with direct sword slashes. This isn't even mentioning that getting a game over on either phase boots you back to the hub world, meaning that you have to fight King Dedede again. Brilliant. Even after defeating Dark Matter, you're still not done with 100% completion. What do you have to do to get those triple digits? Well, after each boss in Worlds 1 through 6 is defeated, you get the opportunity to play a little minigame where you have to collect all the stars that appear while avoiding obstacles. These play similarly to the boss fights with comparable patterns, but they are at least pretty useful for obtaining extra lives if needed. As I just hinted at though, these are required to not just play, but also get a perfect score on if you want to reach 100%. What I don't really like is that no matter what the outcome of the minigame is, you're booted out of it with no immediate option to retry. If you accidentally got hit by a hazard or missed a star, you have to either finish a level or reset the game. Guess which option is faster? They probably did this so that you couldn't cheese the game for infinite lives, since you do retain the stars and lives you gained even if you fail the minigame, but you can already kind of do that by repeatedly soft resetting the game, typically by pressing A, B, start, and select simultaneously. A more agreeable solution would have been to tally the stars at the end of the game and only give you extra lives if you actually got the perfect score. If you didn't, you would get nothing from the minigame but have the option to retry it. Another nitpick is that there's no way, that I noticed anyways, of telling if you've actually gotten the perfect score on the minigame previously. This could result in you replaying the minigame when it's not really necessary. The final stipulation for getting 100% completion is finding this female GUI in the animal friend bag. Oftentimes, if you've reached the sack but already have the animal friend that was inside, GUI will pop out to give you some extra HP, but on rare occasions, his lighter shaded counterpart with a ribbon will give you an extra life instead. I don't know if there's any predetermined condition to get this to happen. It happened to me when I wasn't at full HP, but this feels luck-based. In total, Kirby's Dream Land 2 is often touted as one of the hardest in the series to get 100% completion in, but really, most of that difficulty feels artificial and a result of a lack of communication to the player. I know that optional content like this is intended to extend the game's longevity and all, but Kirby's Adventure didn't really suffer from the same issues. If you want to go for 100% in this game anyways, I'd recommend a guide of some kind. The reward for 100% completion also isn't the greatest compared to the previous two games. No extra hard mode this time, just a sound test, a boss endurance mode, and a minigame rush. A bit disappointing if you ask me, but at least the boss rush is optional this time. Whew, I had no idea I'd have so much to say about the optional content. Ultimately, Kirby's Dream Land 2 didn't leave the greatest impression on me. Aside from the animal friends and some little new touches to the level design, every improvement made over the first Kirby's Dream Land was already done in Kirby's Adventure, and in most cases better executed there. Maybe that's an unfair comparison to make. For Game Boy standards, this is a pretty beefy game, definitely having much more content than Kirby's Dream Land. Still, not all of the increased amount of content is well handled, and even disregarding the bonus stuff, the experience on the whole comes off as good but a little unforgettable. For me personally, Kirby's Adventure is still the king of the series so far as expected, but there are still plenty more opportunities for it to be dethroned in the future.